The Truth Girls.
Hi everyone. Okay, first of all, about the Russian hacking thing. Contrary to what the mainstream media will try to have you believe, CIA judgment on Russia built on swell of evidence, it has not been proven that the American election was hacked by Russians. This is disputed within the CIA and between the CIA and the FBI and between the CIA and the ODNI, which is the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which has, as they say here, not endorsed their assessment because of the lack of conclusive evidence that Moscow intended to boost Trump over Democratic opponent Hillary Clinton. Update, now the FBI accepts the CIA's conclusions that the Russians hacked to help Trump. But where's the proof? At this point, it's really not crystal clear that the Russians hacked anything. In fact, there's some evidence coming out that if there was any hacking going on, it had nothing to do with the Russians. Judge Napolitano says U.S. intel was behind leaking of emails to WikiLeaks, not Russia. Judge Andrew Napolitano questioned whether Russia was really behind the leaks of emails to WikiLeaks, arguing that U.S. intelligence agents had more incentive to try to influence the election outcome. Here's something else you might like to see. This is an interview on Fox News with Megyn Kelly. I know some of you can't stand to watch Megyn Kelly, but I'd recommend you kind of overcome that just to listen to what this guy has to say. New York Congressman Peter King, who is a member of Homeland Security Committee and the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, says that the CIA has no proof of Russian interference in the election and hasn't presented any to Congress. He claims that the intel community may actually be carrying out an anti-Trump disinformation campaign. It's true that the CIA were supposed to give a briefing to the government, but they canceled at the last minute. And so far, they just won't come out and say, really, what evidence do they have? Senate Homeland Chair, CIA won't brief me on Russia election hacking. Here's another person who says, well, if you've got the evidence, why don't you share it with us? Senate Homeland Security Committee Chairman Ron Johnson told CNBC on Friday he has not seen evidence of Russia-led hacking to interfere with the U.S. presidential election, but said such moves from Moscow would not be surprising. He's open to it, and he says he asked the CIA for a briefing, but, quote, they refused to give it to me. Now, the CIA may have good reasons why they don't want to give this information. Could be that the hacking may have come from somewhere entirely different. Check this out. Georgia's Secretary of State says cyber attacks traced to DHS addresses. Well, that would be really embarrassing for the CIA if they came out with their information and it turned out that it wasn't the Russians, it was the DHS. I could see why they wouldn't want to have a briefing on that. It would be really embarrassing if it turned out the DHS and the CIA were involved in some kind of conspiracy to overthrow the election. Imagine that. The Georgia Secretary of State office now confirms 10 separate cyber attacks on its network were all traced back to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security addresses. That is really weird. Why would the DHS be hacking people's emails? Aren't they supposed to provide security? Like, do stuff like prevent hacking? In an exclusive interview, a visibly frustrated Secretary of State Brian Kemp confirmed the attacks of different levels on his agency's network over the last 10 months. He says they all trace back to DHS internet provider addresses. What a mess! I don't suppose the DHS might be working for the Russians? Bizarre. Well, here's another bombshell. Exclusive, ex-British ambassador who is now a WikiLeaks operative claims Russia did not provide Clinton emails. They were handed over to him at a DC park by an intermediary for disgusted Democratic whistleblowers. So this guy is saying it was people within the Democratic administration who were so disgusted that they decided to expose what was going on. The leaker's motivation was, quote, disgust at the corruption of the Clinton Foundation and the, quote, tilting of the primary election playing field against Bernie Sanders. It's true, they really screwed Bernie. I guess that just didn't sit well with some people. I could see that happening. Regardless of whether the Russians hacked into the DNC, the documents WikiLeaks published did not come from that. And you may remember that the documents that came from WikiLeaks had a lot to do with exposing shadiness and dubious activities within the DNC. I think they really contributed to people losing confidence in the current administration. So safe to say anyway that although the media is telling you that the Russians hacked and changed the election, there's really no solid proof of that. And there's actually some proof coming out that if there were any hacks and leaks, it may have come from within the U.S. government, like from whistleblowers. Nonetheless, Senate quietly passes the Countering Disinformation and Propaganda Act. If you'd like to see the text for yourself, it's right here. Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2017, H.R. 6393. And the bill is also called the Countering Information Warfare Act of 2016. Now, Zero Hedge did a very good job analyzing this document, so you probably want to go and check out the article for yourself. I just like to let you know the passage concerned here is in Title 5, Matters Relating to Foreign Countries. This title establishes an executive branch interagency committee to counter active measures by the Russian Federation to exert covert influences over peoples and governments through front groups, covert broadcasting, media manipulation, disinformation or forgeries, funding agents of influence, incitement, offensive counterintelligence, assassinations, or terrorism acts. And I have to say that most of that reads like George Soros's curriculum vitae, but I guess that's okay because he's an American, not a Russian. I think the concern is that this will be used as an excuse to censor alternative media, to accuse people of being Russian spies, to ban certain people from exercising what was up until now their right to free speech. Now, as Zero Hedge mentions here, the bill was passed by the House at the end of November with an overwhelming majority, and which seeks to crack down on websites suspected of conducting Russian propaganda and calling for the U.S. government to counter active measures by Russia to exert covert influence. As they point out, this came up long before the fake news narrative. There was H.R. 5181 to, quote, establish a Center for Information Analysis and Response, which will pinpoint sources of disinformation, analyze data, and in true dystopic manner, develop and disseminate fact-based narratives to counter effrontery propaganda, which is ridiculous because the mainstream media is so full of non-factual narratives and propaganda. I showed you in my last video how the government colludes with corporations and mainstream media to put out things like VNRs, straight up propaganda, passing as news. It's a bit ridiculous. They would set something up to develop and disseminate fact-based narratives to counter effrontery propaganda. Are you kidding me? Anyhow, a lot of this has to do with the election, the results of the election, and the current administration not wanting to lose their power, not wanting to lose the status quo. And so the question is, could any of this now be used to overturn the results of the election? It seems like a really desperate attempt to cast a lot of doubt on the results of the election to the point where the electors may vote against what they were pledged to vote. However, there's a little good news in that area. From The Guardian, Republicans do not plan to defect from Trump in final electoral college vote. To sum it up at this point, there's only one elector who is at least publicly saying that he intends to vote faithlessly. It would take, from what I understand, 37 electors to do this, to be able to shift it to Hillary's favor. And at this point, there's no evidence that that's going to happen. I think that this actually offers quite a bit of reassurance. You know, to me, when I look at all this, I get the picture of actually a very corrupt administration. So corrupt that even people within it have gotten absolutely sick of what's going on, starting to hack and leak information to WikiLeaks, to the outside. And now this administration is trying to find a way to do damage control, to say, oh, it was the Russians who did it. To say that the election was invalid, to try to get things to turn back in their favor. Honestly, I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're going to pass some bills like this, like these Ministry of Truth bills, to try to clamp down. But I don't think that the electors are going to vote faithlessly against Trump. I think Hillary should just accept the fact that she lost. This administration is going to be out. You know what? I'm happy to see that, because look, all this stuff, this anti-propaganda crap, these lies, all this dirty dealings that's been going on. This is under the current administration, which has been in power for decades. So I think it's a good thing you have Trump now. You're going to have a new start, really, with a different administration at the helm, and hopefully things will improve. And I don't think that their efforts to, at the last minute, to turn this back in their favor are going to pan out. Trump is going to be the president. Trump is the president. And, you know, maybe that'll be a good thing for the alternative media as well. I think your Constitution is pretty solid. I don't think it's going to be so easy to get rid of freedom of speech in America. And it's not going to be easy to get rid of Donald Trump either. That's what I think at this point. So, well, let me know what you think. Thank you for leaving your comments. Thanks for giving me a thumbs up. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for listening to me. And I'll see you next time.